Hello, and welcome to Inventors Helping Inventors. I'm your host, Alan Beckley, inventor of the Wonder Wallet. If you're an inventor searching for proven ways to make money with your invention, if you dream to see your product selling in stores everywhere, you've come to the right place. There's no better place to get help than from experts, inventors who've already achieved success. Every week, I interview successful inventors, asking them the questions you want to know. Tune in to learn from the experts so you can get your invention out of the tank and into the bank.
It doesn't really matter what type of paralysis, whether it's stroke or spinal cord injury or motor neuron disease or even loss of limb and amputation. If the brain is fine and functioning and people can still think about performing a thought, think about moving their hand, even if they can't physically do that because there's a disconnect or a disease or damage to the pathway between their brain and their limb, then they could be candidates for brain-machine interfaces.
If you've listened to this podcast for a while, you've heard me talking about the Inventors Bootcamp, right? Over the last 3 years, hundreds of inventors have joined us in the Inventors Bootcamp, and we have lots of exciting success stories from our students. But guess what? The bootcamp is not for everyone. If you like to tinker with invention ideas occasionally on weekends, hoping that someday someone will buy your idea, the Inventors Bootcamp is not for you. If you think it's your job to just come up with ideas and someone else can take care of the rest, prototypes, packaging, and contacting companies, the Inventors Bootcamp is not for you. But if inventing really matters to you, if you know deep in your heart that you've got an invention ripe for success, if you're willing to learn and do whatever it takes to be successful, I'm here to help you, and the Inventors Bootcamp is your ticket, your next logical step forward. So, what is it? When is it? And how do you sign up? The Inventors Bootcamp is 5 days of live interactive Zoom meetings. Monday, October 14th through Friday, October 18th, for 1 hour each night. Teaches you precisely how to create a clear, concise marketing message, which is exactly what companies want to hear. When you join us, you'll meet other inventors, plus you get a licensing masterclass, and lots more. The next Inventors Bootcamp starts very soon. Monday, October 14th. Enrollment is open now. Just go to www.alanbeckley.com/bootcamp. Many podcast listeners, just like you, have joined the Inventors Bootcamp. Here are just a few of our success stories. Duncan Ashworth has 2 companies interested in licensing his COVID-killing floor sanitizing invention. Daryl Carter secured a business partner and licensing arrangement. His asthma relief product debuts this fall. And Julietta Hughes tested her portrait artist invention. Now she's got a clear strategy for reaching out to companies to license it. Ready to add your success story to our list? The bootcamp is your ticket. Register now at www.alanbeckley.com/bootcamp to save your seat in the October bootcamp. I wanted to share with you a project of mine that I've been working on for 18 months now. And while it has nothing to do with inventing, as a creative, I thought you might find it interesting. I have just finished my first draft of my new fictional dystopian novel, Earth 2040, Rise of the Bots. There's a lot more work ahead because I'm going to have to rewrite, going to have to hire a professional editor. And so I'm giving you the opportunity, if you're interested, to support me through my GoFundMe campaign for this project. And you can find all the details if you're interested in knowing more about my new book, Earth 2040, Rise of the Bots. Just go to alanbeckley.com/novel. And you can find links to the GoFundMe campaign and a blurb on the book. Thanks for listening, and if you find you want to support it, that'd be fantastic. If so, please let me know. Just reach out to Alan at alanbeckley.com. Welcome to episode number 446. Today is a rebroadcast of one of our classic favorites, episode number 324, just over 1 year ago on July 31st of 2023 with Aussie inventor Professor Nick Opie. He invented Stentrode, a brain-computer interface that helps paralysis patients. I think you're going to enjoy this episode as much as I did. Based in Melbourne, Australia, Professor Nicholas Opie, 42, is a biomedical engineer and world expert in brain-computer interface technology. He is co-founder and chief technology officer of Synchron, one of the world's leading brain-computer interface companies. Synchron is the first company to receive FDA approval to trial a permanent brain-computer interface implant and is currently in human clinical trials. Synchron's brain implant allows people who are paralyzed to control a digital device, like a phone or computer, by using their thoughts. The business has offices in New York and Melbourne and raised over $150 million in funding to support the development of its innovation to date. Professor Opie designed and developed the company's brain implant, the Stentrode, which was named one of Time magazine's top 100 inventions in 2021. Nick is also professor and laboratory head of the Vascular Bionics Laboratory, Department of Medicine, University of Melbourne, and a National Health and Medical Research Council Research Fellow. Professor Opie has taken multiple numerous biomedical devices from concept to clinic, including a bionic eye designed to restore sight to those with vision loss, and a bionic spine aimed at restoring independence, communication, and mobility to those with paralysis. He has published over 55 peer-reviewed articles in journals including in Nature Biomedical Engineering, Nature Biotechnology, and the Journal of American Medical Association, and has filed over 90 patents. You'll want to listen to this entire episode to learn how Stentrode can be inserted easily, avoiding the invasive open brain surgery required by most brain-machine interfaces. Also, how Stentrode paralysis patients can easily learn to send emails, text messages, and even do online shopping, giving them newfound independence. And finally, how Stentrode has now been given the green light by FDA for feasibility studies with patients. By the way, as a special treat for our podcast listeners, I've created a link to Nick Opie's colleague, Tom Oxley, giving his TED Talk about the amazing Stentrode. Just go to www.alanbeckley.com/Stentrode to watch the TED Talk show now. And Stentrode is spelled Stentrode. Now let's get right to our interview with Nick Opie. Well, Nick Opie, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. Dr. Opie, I'd like to start out by saying, can you share a bit of your background with our listeners? Where did you grow up and go to school, and what did you do before you became an inventor? Can you share that with our listeners?
Sure. So, Melbourne boy in Australia, born and raised here, went to university at Monash University doing electrical engineering and science. And I think the reason I chose those is twofold. Firstly, I have always, ever since being a really young boy, loved making things with my hands. And the second part is I've always really wanted to know how the body worked and how to make it better. And I think just fortunate that living in a time where I can put those two together and start learning how to make machines for the body, how it can make things and use them to help the body work better or work how it's meant to. So finishing university, did a PhD at Melbourne University, which was on retinal neuroprosthetics. So bionic eyes. Essentially, we were trying to develop a technology that allowed people with vision loss and had some vision restoration through the use of an implant. And so that's sort of, it seems like a lifetime ago. I think finishing that project off when we turned a technology through to something that was implanted in people was the same time that the Stentrode project came about, and then when we formed the company and the research working at that application.
Well, thanks for sharing that with us. And that's fascinating. It sounds like you've had a pretty diverse background in really the kind of intersection of electrical engineering and science, but also then bringing it together for medical applications and things, which is pretty amazing. I wanted to mention that you've partnered with Dr. Thomas Oxley to develop a brain machine interface device that is called Stentrode to help millions afflicted with severe paralysis and other neurological disorders. Can you describe the aha moment that caused you to invent the Stentrode? Could you share that with us?
Sure. So I met Tom when I was finishing my PhD. At the time, he was a medical neurologist doing his medical training. I'd always had a fascination with how to interact with the brain. That's what led me to doing the bionic eye. And he obviously was doing a lot of work in stenting and working through blood vessels to help people with different medical conditions. And we got together, and the idea was that the conventional way of accessing the brain for brain machine interfaces was using invasive surgery. As you mentioned, brain machine interfaces are a technology designed for people with paralysis. It doesn't really matter what type of paralysis, whether it's stroke or spinal cord injury or motor neuron disease or even loss of limb and amputation. If the brain is fine and functioning and people can still think about performing a thought, think about moving their hand, even if they can't physically do that because there's a disconnect or a disease or damage to the pathway between their brain and their limb, then they could be candidates for brain machine interfaces. And certainly in Australia and the US and around the world, there's many people who are unable to interact and control their external environment, even though their brains are perfectly fine. And Stephen Hawking made an example of someone whose brain was incredible, but their body sort of let them down a little bit. So when we were designing the technology, we really wanted to come up with a way that didn't have to rely on sensors that were outside the skin, because the skull historically blocks a lot of the information coming out of the brain. So you need to access the brain itself. But the way they were doing that was invasively. It was by removing some of the skull and by inserting electrodes directly into the brain itself. I should say that these technologies obviously have had some huge research success. They've shown that people can think about performing an action and that these sensors or neural interfaces can pick up this activity and be used to control a prosthetic limb or an exoskeleton or a digital keyboard. But the invasive surgery is what's hampered the clinical translation and the commercial translation of these technologies into a product that can be used by people outside of a research or clinical trial. And so for us at the moment was really coming up with how do we do the same that they're doing but make it a lot safer. And obviously interventional neuroradiology is a procedure that's certainly over the last decade got a lot of traction in the brain. It's been used before for blood clots and stenting in the heart and below the neck, but above the neck, it really became apparent that you could put devices through blood vessels and you could remove blood clots, or you could fix other problems with the vascular system. And so really for us, the aha moment was, what, we could use that same technology, the same surgical procedure, the same infrastructure they've already got. But instead of removing the stent, we could leave something in there that then allows us to record activity and allow people to control external equipment with it.
That's phenomenal. You've made several points that I'd really like to highlight for our listeners. And one of them is you explained more clearly and concisely the way the brain machine interface can help somebody. And you said, essentially, if the brain functions and can still think a thought, a brain machine interface can actually reconnect that physical function that's been lost in a way that it can reconnect that function, if that's correct, which is pretty cool. It's a simple way to think of it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The brain's amazing and the technology we have now is also amazing. We're not recording thoughts, is what is sometimes inferred through science fiction movies and what have you. But what we're recording, and as well as others in the field, are when the brain changes, when there's more electrical activity. And so obviously the brain has a lot of neurons, a lot of different connections. These have electrical charges and associated with them, per se, and then you can record what's going on in the brain in terms of when is your brain at a resting state and when does it suddenly have a lot of activity. And I think I like to think about it as a football game. But if you take an Australian rules football game, in the middle of the game or before the game, there's the crowd, which into the neurons, they're all just sitting around talking to each other. There's a general hum around the ground. But then when someone scores a goal, and the entire crowd, or at least half of the crowd, will erupt and be really excited. And similarly in the brain, if you're measuring something and you're not thinking about performing an action, it's called baseline. When you're measuring, when someone's resting, there's just this little hum of activity that's happening in the brain. And then when you're trying to perform an action, whether it's grab a cup or whether it's plant your foot or whatever it might be, then there's a region of the brain that becomes more excited and more active. And this is where you can record these changes in neural signals and use those to infer, can be used to control external equipment.
Again, thanks for sharing that as well. It's just essentially electrical stimulus that the brain creates from what I can gather. And once you locate the portion of the brain that's going to react to tell me to move my hand to grab a glass of water, for example, then you can reproduce that. You mentioned several times that a lot of the existing brain-machine interfaces are very invasive. By that, you may have to go into the skull and carve a place in there and install something, electrode or something inside the brain itself. Whereas via your stent, it sounds like it's not invasive. Is that correct?
You're right. We don't have to do open brain surgery. We don't have to perform a craniotomy. We can access the brain by blood vessels. So it's a very small incision, just like getting an injection in the neck. And then from there, we can just use the natural occurring pathway or highways of the body, which is the blood vessels, to get up to the brain and to the motor cortex, which is, for paralysis, the area of interest. And so this is a way that is safer for the patients, but it's also better for the hospitals, because if you're doing invasive brain surgery where you're removing some of the skull, the patients have to stay in for at least a couple of days, a week, maybe 2 weeks, just to make sure and monitor that nothing's gone wrong. With us, and sort of certainly with the stent procedures that are performed globally now, a lot of those procedures only take a couple of hours, and the patient comes in, their blood clots removed, and then they're sort of released. So this is a way that it reduces the requirement of long stay and gets a better outcome for the patients. With a lot of these other invasive technologies as well, one of the limitations is how you get the information out of the brain. And what's been done historically is that they've had a pedestal or a connection that connects to the skull, that's sort of a cable that's bolted into the skull, and then that protrudes out of the head. And what this means is, firstly, there's always going to be a direct link between the outside world and the brain, which is a pathway for infection. And because of that, it means that these technologies have not been able to be used by people independently and in their own homes. And I think that's really important. So when we started out, our mission was, we need to get devices that people can use in their own homes. How can we make it safe enough? How can we make it acceptable by regulatory ethics, whoever it might be, that this is something that someone can use at home and not just supervised in a clinic or a research laboratory. I think that's one of the differentiators of our technology as well.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That certainly clarifies it for me as well. And I wanted to ask, can you describe what the Stentrode looks like? How big is it, and how does it work to give relief to, say, paralyzed patients? And also, of course, Elon Musk and others, I'm sure, are working in the same brain-machine interface arena, at least for him, via his company, Neuralink. How is your invention different, say, from the BCI used by Neuralink? Can you kind of speak to both those, what it looks like, how it works, and then how it's kind of different, say, from what Neuralink, for example, is working on?
Yeah, sure. So the Stentrode is the recording part of the system. We have a vessel called the superior sagittal sinus that runs underneath the skull, but along the midline of the brain, and it's surprisingly big. about as big as your little finger. And so what we've done is we've made a self-expanding mesh, if you will, that can be inserted through a small 1 millimeter catheter or 1 millimeter tube. And then when it's in the superior sagittal sinus over the motor cortex, expands to be the size and curvature of the vessel, so about the size of your little finger. And by having a very small device that expands, it means that it's hollow on the middle, and so it doesn't impede blood flow, and essentially it's invisible to the brain because it's still inside the blood vessel. This information, when it's recorded from the brain, we have a lead that goes to a percutaneous pocket, a pocket that's in the chest, similar to a pacemaker. And that is where, from there is where the information is wirelessly transmitted out of the body to an external system. And so our system is completely under the skin. It's completely covered. There's nothing protruding. So not only do you not look any different, you can also use it at home safely and with very low infection risk because there's nothing that comes out. In terms of Neuralink, I think some of the differences appear to be that, like I mentioned, he's doing the brain surgery, from what I understand, and obviously there haven't been any peer-reviewed publications on this. It's all from what he's written on different social media sites, but they're going for a very large number of electrodes that are implanted or stabbed into the brain via a robot. The interesting thing about his robot is it's designed to avoid blood vessels, but these are the blood vessels that we're taking advantage of to get to the brain. So I think ours is an easier way of accessing the information-rich areas of the brain and doing so in a way that's has a good history of safety and efficacy in people.
Well, thanks for sharing that and clarifying the difference again. It keeps coming back to the same thing. It seems like the approach by so many is very invasive, as you described, and tends to take away a lot of independence the person might otherwise have because of something protruding outside their skull and an outside device of some kind, plus the potential for infection anytime you have something that could access the outside into the brain. So I can clearly see how a stent that is pretty easily inserted. My dad had a stent from open heart surgery 1,000,000 years ago, and that was very successful. Man, triple bypass surgery too. So I understand a little bit about that. But I did want to ask, has the Stentrode been tested in the laboratory? And also, has it been approved for use with humans yet? Where does it stand in the product development roadmap look like for you at this time with regards to FDA approval, et cetera? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. We did our first clinical trial in Australia starting in 2019. In August, we implanted our first participant. Over the next couple of years, we implanted another 4 participants and finished that trial. And it was a safety trial. And really the purpose of that was to show that the device didn't move, so it didn't migrate, and it didn't cause any infections or risks to the patient. And from the 4 men there with motor neuron disease, each of them were able to use the system to control external equipment. But more importantly, it was shown to be safe, and there were no serious adverse events. For any of the patients, the surgery was fine. The patients tolerated the device for one of them still got it, so more than 2 years. And so the safety profile there allowed us to go to the FDA and request to do an early feasibility study. And a couple of years ago, that was granted. And so we have been given approval by the FDA to perform an early study. So the way studies work in the US for your listeners is you normally do what's called an early feasibility study, where you look at a small number of patients and assess safety. That will then turn into a larger trial or a pivotal trial, where you might do a larger number of patients. And on success of that trial, that's when your device is approved for commercial release. And at that time, that's when doctors can prescribe it to their patients, or patients can request it from their doctors. So we haven't got to that point yet, but we're certainly on the way. And we've planted a number of patients in the US, and similar to the Australian trial, it's all going very well. We haven't had any device-related adverse events, and the patients are able to use the system to control digital equipment. So we can connect them to a computer, and they can control anything your eye would. They can do online shopping, online banking, they can emails. We can also connect them to phones, and they can do texting and calling. Although these patients are nonverbal, so texting is obviously and messaging is more useful to them. And we've started connecting them with smart homes and TVs and lights and things like that. And for us, I think what we really wanted to do at the start was, we know that we can put more sensors and electrodes in. You can always put more in if you need, but what is the most simple, most reliable way that these patients can have some benefit? Our system, we don't want to have months of calibration and training and testing and getting them to use it. We want them to be able to use it as soon as it's turned on and use it to do something useful and functional. And so we've spent a lot of time looking at how we can get the most value, even out of just one switch. Even if you just have one electrode or one sensor that is being used, what can you provide with that? And that's sort of like the very basic function. And certainly, obviously from there, we've got 16 sensors in our device. We can keep going up and up and give more usability and utility. But from the baseline, we've been able to achieve all of those instrumental activities of daily living and helping people become more independent, starting at a baseline of, let's just see what we can do with one command, and how far can we get that.
Well, thanks for explaining that. And as you were describing that, I was thinking about, there are so many different things that suddenly open up for these patients that have lost this kind of functionality, like emails, phones, at least and texting and things like that, and being able to interact with the world in a much more positive way than their disability or their paralysis or their neurological disorder has prevented them from doing before. So I can imagine the excitement level of patients that receive these is probably pretty amazing.
It is. It's been amazing. And I think one of the things I didn't appreciate at the time was the impact that this technology would not have just on the people that are being implanted, the ones with the paralysis, but also their carers and their loved ones. There's a nice story of one of the Australian men who received the device. His wife was his carer, and she was AMD or ALS, motor neuron disease. It's a progressive sort of degenerative condition where sometimes for no reason whatsoever you will start becoming weak. Then you'll start getting paralysis in your legs. You'll lose the ability to control your arms. You'll lose the ability to talk, and then eventually you'll lose the ability to breathe on your own. And so she was watching this and obviously very concerned about it, and didn't want to leave his side in case there was something that he needed. If he needed a drink, if he needed to go to the bathroom, she had to be there to help him with that. And so when we were able to connect him with a phone, then that meant that for the first time in many years, she was actually able to go into the garden and do some gardening. She was able to go down to the shops and do some shopping. She was able to meet up with some friends, knowing that because he was connected to a phone and the WhatsApp messaging or on the computer, then he could always get in contact with her if he needed something. And to provide her that sense of sort of freedom as well was really amazing to see. And I think it's undervalued the benefits that the loved ones and carers have on just knowing that their family members or the people they're looking after are safe and don't need to be looked after by them all the time.
And that's amazing as well, thinking about the impact not only on the patient, but also the caretaker, because it's so stressful for them and so challenging for them. And as you said, it reduces their independence greatly as well, because the concern that they need to be there more or less 24/7. And now it gives them, an electronic way for the husband, the wife, whomever's impacted, to reach out to them if they need something. And now they can actually enjoy life a little bit as well as taking care of them. So that's pretty amazing. So as we roll towards a close, I'd like to ask, are there any parting words that you'd like to leave us with?
I think for all the young engineers out there, or even the old ones, some of the keys points that have sort of helped us on our journey, and obviously we haven't finished it yet, but I think if you can somehow surround yourself by a really good team, a really positive team, then that's going to help you when things get tough. And they always will. You'll come up with some roadblocks. You'll come up against brick walls. You'll be developing technology that for one reason or other needs to be redone and rethought about. And so if you have a team that can support you, that's certainly a big thing. And also the resilience to know that, you're the first time you design one, similar to the first time I designed a Stentrode by hand, it wasn't very good. The second one probably wasn't that good either, but we had enough conviction. We knew what we were doing. We were very excited by where it could go and really had the resilience to keep pushing and keep working, keep developing, learning from all our mistakes and making sure that each iteration of the technology got a little bit better and a little bit better. And I'm glad now that it got to a point where it was good enough that it could be implanted and shown to be useful in humans. And I think a lot of you young engineers might like to hear that this sort of stuff doesn't just appear. You really do have to work hard at it, and failing is good, because that's how you can learn what to improve on the next time.
Well, thanks. You made a couple of really great points there, and especially the idea that young engineer and old engineers, surround yourself with a good team. And what I would like to add to that is just the sanity check thing. We think of inventors so much as working away like a lone wolf by themselves and wondering if they're crazy because there's nobody else to kind of, respond to that understands what they're doing. But when you're surrounded with a team, then you can bounce ideas back and forth, and it can be quite beneficial, I'd say.
Absolutely. And certainly teams with different expertise or opinions to yours. So both in my role working to develop a bionic eye and this role, engineers and clinicians worked very closely together. And I think that's important. Engineers, like myself, love adding bells and whistles to things. We want to make it more and more complicated and add more and more little features, which is great. But at the end of the day, like, the doctors on the other side of the spectrum are like, oh, I just want this to be as simple as possible, because my main role is to look after the patients. I don't want too many bells and whistles. I just need to be as easy and simple as it can be. And I think there's a really nice middle ground if you have the right team, where you can get sufficient number of bells and whistles to do all the things it needs to do, but also keep it really simple and safe so that the doctors and practitioners can use it and focus on their main job as well. So having teams with different opinions allows you to do, like you were saying, do a sanity check and make sure that you're developing the technology for the right purpose and not getting caught up, as engineers often do, in just making things for the sake of making things. I think that's one of the benefits of the team as well.
Well, thanks for that. And Nick, my final question then to you is, how can our listeners reach you if they have other questions?
Great question. I think I'm online. There's always happy to try and get to emails and respond to things. I try and get out and about in Melbourne and the US at various different conferences, and always happy to have a chat about either the technology I've been developing or try and help them through the journey that they've got. I wish everyone luck in whatever they're pursuing, and hopefully that they'll be able to get some of the nice rewards at the end of the day, like we've started to get.
And do you have an email you mind them reaching out to you, or a website that they can find out more from you?
If they look up synchron.com, that's obviously the company that's working closely with the FDA to commercialize this technology and make it available. There should be a link there.
And just for clarity, that's synchron.com?
Correct.
Okay, so that's a great place where they can find more information. Well, Dr. Opie, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast with us today and sharing your journey with this fantastic Stentrode, and something that's going to really revolutionize a lot of people's lives in a very positive way. And just enjoyed learning from you and hearing about your journey, and like to reserve the opportunity, maybe another 6 months or a year, to get back in touch with you and see what you and your team have going on at that time.
No problem. We're always coming up with new things, so I'm sure I'll have some other things to talk about. So yeah, I'd love to.
All right. Well, once again, thanks so much for being on the podcast, and we enjoyed chatting with you today.
Thanks, Alan.
Are you a serious inventor who makes no excuses, but who's tired of hard work with no results? Are you committed to do whatever it takes to get your invention into the market in a big way, but sometimes you feel overwhelmed? wondering who you can trust and what you should be doing, or if you're even on the right track? If so, you could be a good candidate to join my top-level executive training for inventors called Mastermind Consulting. Mastermind Consulting is a full 12 months of one-on-one engagement with me that includes monthly Zoom meetings, homework with unlimited emails, and follow-up. It's like having me on retainer for a full year to guide your actions to keep you on track to accomplish your goals. This program is not a fit for every inventor. You must apply and be accepted to join the program. Mastermind Consulting is working very well for my first client, Matt, and I have limited openings for only 2 additional clients for 2024. Once those slots are filled, there'll be no more availability until 2025. Here's what you can expect to gain if you're selected to join Mastermind Consulting. You'll come away with a step-by-step plan to make sure you've selected your strongest invention idea as your hero product, so you don't waste time or money on a product that can't succeed. You will learn exactly how to assess your product's strengths and weaknesses versus key competitor products, and you'll create a clear, concise 30-second pitch to make companies want to say yes to your product. Finally, you'll learn precisely how to create a curated list of companies to pitch your product to for licensing, and how to pitch to them the right way. So if you're tired of hard work and no results, and you're ready to make a commitment to yourself and to your invention, here's how to apply to work with me for a full year in Mastermind Consulting. Send me an email to alan@alanbeckley.com, and in the subject line put Mastermind Consulting. And I want you to answer in the email for me 3 questions. Question number 1, where are you in your invention journey right now? Just 2 or 3 sentences to tell me where you are. Question number 2, why your product really matters and why you're committed to it. Once again, 2 or 3 sentences. And then question number 3, it's a simple one. Why I should select you to join the program. Just send all of this to alan@alanbeckley.com and put in the subject line, Mastermind Consulting. I look forward to hearing from you, and I look forward to working closely with you to help you finally achieve your dreams. Thanks so much for tuning in to Inventors Helping Inventors. If you like the show, please tell your friends about it. Make sure to subscribe in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts so you won't miss a single episode. Talk to you soon.